Hello, and welcome to the third event in our Envoy Conversation Series, The Future of International Student and Intern Mobility. We have a great event ahead of us, but before we get there, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's session will be approximately 60 minutes long, including an audience Q&A at the end of the presentation. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. To do so, please type them in via the GoToWebinar box on your screen. This webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a link to download the recording after today's live session. Finally, please excuse any audio and video hiccups that may occur as a result of us all today being remote. If you're experiencing severe audio difficulties, please try signing out and then back on. My name is Stephanie Lewin, and I'm Head of Global Immigration for Envoy Global. I have been in the immigration field for nearly 25 years and started my career in 1999 as a district adjudications officer for the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which is now the USCIS. I've held positions as in-house counsel for a Fortune 500 company and as a leader within relocation companies and law firms. I was an expat in London, England for more than 7 years and have firsthand personal experience with being an immigrant to another country. The student and intern topic is near and dear to me, having studied and interned abroad in 1994 in London as a Hansard Scholar. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about Envoy Global for those unfamiliar with us. For nearly 20 years, Envoy has been on a mission to fix the inefficient, frustrating, and confusing immigration process. We combine a top-ranked legal team with innovative technology to deliver the only platform that makes it seamless for companies to hire, mobilize, and manage a global workforce. We secure work authorizations in over 150 countries. We've grown 37% year over year, and we work with over 1,000 customers. We are particularly proud of our NPS score, which is a testament to the employee experience we provide. And I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel now. Jennifer Clinton is the current president and CEO of Cultural Vistas, a nonprofit international exchange organization that offers career-focused international internships, educational study tours, and language immersion in the United States and more than 130 countries around the world. Prior to joining Cultural Vistas in late 2017, she served as president and CEO of Global Ties US, where she led a grassroots network of community-based organizations in 45 states and 21 countries that engaged volunteers to implement public diplomacy and international exchange programs in partnership with the U.S. Department of State. Jennifer serves on the boards of Women's Foreign Policy Group, the Alliance for International Exchange, and OpenDC. Jennifer has devoted her career to international education and business because of her deep passion for bridging cultures, people, and ideas. She is best known for developing, implementing, and managing bold organizational transitions, as well as helping individuals and nonprofits to realize their full potential. Welcome, Jennifer. A bit about Cultural Vistas. Cultural Vistas is a nonprofit international exchange organization based in New York with offices in Washington, D.C. and Berlin, Germany. Every year, the organization supports over 7,500 individuals and organizations through career-focused international internships, educational study tours, and language immersion in the United States and more than 130 countries around the world. Cultural Vista's diverse portfolio of international programs include the International Visitor Leadership Program, which is the longest running State Department sponsored exchange program, for which it serves as one of 8 implementing partners. Through its role as a J1 exchange visitor program sponsor, it also brings individuals from more than 100 countries to the US to take part in internships, training programs, and teaching positions, affording them a firsthand experience of America, its people, culture, and business practices. Next on our panel, we have Melissa Torres. Melissa Torres is president and CEO of the Forum on Education Abroad, which is the leading membership organization for the field with over 800 members. Melissa previously served as vice president for academic programs at IES Abroad, where she supervised 36 international study abroad centers in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Her campus-based experience includes leading a variety of international initiatives at Brown University, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and The Ohio State University. She's also worked as a change management consultant for Accenture, and most recently worked with a variety of colleges and universities to develop innovative service-leading programs at Global Vision International. Melissa has 2 decades of experience in higher education and program development. With a significant breadth of leadership skills and expertise in creating and growing international partnerships, she brings unique insight to the internationalization process as she helps institutions better understand how they can achieve their goals for global engagement. Melissa also speaks Spanish fluently and has studied French, Irish, Gaelic, and Portuguese. So welcome, Melissa. A little bit about the Forum for Education Abroad. So the Forum is a consortium of educators who champion high-quality education, abroad experiences that ignite curiosity, impact lives, and contribute to a better world. The Forum is a 501c3 nonprofit membership association recognized by the U.S. Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission as the standards development organization for the field of education abroad. The Forum provides training and resources to education abroad professionals, represents the interests of the Forum memberships, communicates the needs of the field, and works collaboratively with Forum staff to assess and move initiatives forward. The Forum's 800+ institutional members include U.S. colleges and universities, overseas institutions, consortia, agencies, organizations, and foundations who are committed to improving education abroad. Our next panelist is Ilir Zherka. Ilir is the Executive Director of the Alliance for International Exchange, the collective public policy voice for the exchange community. He leads staff, members, and stakeholders in multifaceted efforts to expand exchange programs. Through his work at the Alliance, he helped secure $646 million in congressional funding, as well as legislative protections for exchange programs. Ilir has served as executive director of 3 other organizations where he worked on a bipartisan basis to help end ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, advance DC representation in Congress, and launch the Service Year Alliance. He gained policy and political experience working with Congressman George Miller, serving as an advisor to 4 presidential campaigns, and as a political appointee in the Clinton administration. He is the author of Winning the Inside Game, the Handbook of Advocacy Strategies. As an Albanian American, Ilir has personal experience with exchange programs. He immigrated to New York City with his family as a child and was later an IREX fellow in Albania and helped to create the Hope Foundation program. So welcome, Ilir. We're pleased to have you. A little bit about the Alliance for International Exchange. The Alliance for International Exchange is an association that represents organizations and companies comprising the educational and cultural exchange community in the United States and serves as its only collective public policy voice. In addition to congressional advocacy, the Alliance organizes program impact reports, conducts media outreach, develops best practice workshops, and hosts an annual public policy conference. Great. And Sarah is also a panelist, and Sarah Chua is the University Recruiting Manager at Coinbase, which is a digital currency trading platform based in San Francisco, California. Prior to Sarah's career at Coinbase, she spent 5 years working as a university recruiter at Square and Activision Blizzard. Welcome, Sarah. A little bit about Coinbase. Coinbase is a digital currency exchange headquartered in San Francisco, California. It brokers exchanges of Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum, Ethereum Classic, Litecoin, Tezos, and many others with flat currencies in approximately 32 countries and Bitcoin transactions and storage in 190 countries worldwide. Coinbase was founded in 2012 and has received funding from investors, including Andreessen Horowitz, Union Square Ventures, USV, and Ribbit Capital. So thank you, everyone. We're so glad to have you, and I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer as the moderator.
Terrific. Thanks, Stephanie. Great to be with everybody today, and thanks to our panelists for joining us and sharing their expertise. We've got really a rich range of perspectives that we'll be able to share with you today. So the topic of our discussion is the future of international student and intern mobility, which we know is very uncertain at the moment, and we've asked each of our panelists to bring their crystal ball with us to us today and help us help us see what's in the future for this important constituency. So to get us started, I'd love to kick off the conversation by asking each of the panelists kind of just to level set the conversation around, from your perspectives and the perspectives that you represent, why do you see international students and interns so important to our workforce and our economy? And I'll ask Ilir to start with kind of giving a broad brush perspective of kind of the broader workforce perspective in American economy.
Thank you, Jennifer, for hosting today, and also thanks to Envoy for hosting us and bringing us together. Melissa and Sarah, it's a pleasure to be with the two of you as well. So international exchange programs serve a number of functions, but we at the Alliance like to say that there are two overriding features that are really important. First, these programs help support our foreign policy and our national security objectives by bringing people here, enabling them to connect with Americans, foreign partnerships, whether it's personal or business, enable them to go back home with a stronger command, not only of English, but also of the American system of government and our economy, the way it works. We help to position them to be leaders in their community. And as people with an affinity for the United States who have relationships here, we make it possible for us to have ambassadors for the United States, not only in terms of Americans who go abroad, but then also people who come here and go back home. Those people tend to retain their understanding of the United States and an affinity for travel back here, and that helps with our foreign policy objectives. Just recently, this past summer, 44 former U.S. ambassadors wrote a letter to the administration talking about how important these programs are to our diplomacy and our foreign policy objectives. And so we've seen that kind of testimonial in the past, but it was good to see it just so recently. And then the second part is it helps our economy. So not only do you have people who are in positions who are enabling Americans to maintain their jobs, businesses to keep hiring Americans to stay open, but you're also inviting people to the United States who are also spending money here. And you're doing all of that without costing the American taxpayer a dime. These programs are funded by the participants themselves, and that makes them even more, I think, valuable to the American taxpayer. So we're supporting our American economy, we're supporting our national security objectives, and we're not costing within these programs the American taxpayer any money.
Awesome, thanks, Ilir. Melissa, if you could chime in from your perspective of working with so many colleges and universities around the world, you know, what's the value there, at least from the U.S. side of international students and interns?
Certainly. I think most importantly, these students are important because of the immense academic and cultural value that they contribute to our campuses and local communities. They bring perspectives and experiences that enrich the learning and the understanding of global issues for their U.S. counterparts. And as Ilir mentioned, from an economic perspective, last year they contributed $41 billion to our economy. And when you think about the pressure that colleges and universities are under, you know, there are majority of colleges, a vast majority, indicate that they are expecting or experiencing a drop in international student enrollment. And they put that financial loss, many of them are saying the economic impact to the college is somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 to $500,000. And I think, you know, well before COVID-19, institutions of higher ed were already under significant financial pressure from a variety of factors. And many of them rely on international students who pay the full cost of tuition and fees, as well as living in on-campus housing. But I think most importantly, institutions of higher ed need to train the best and the brightest so that they do benefit our economy. It helps us ensure our place as a leader on the world stage and fosters a spirit of innovation, resilience, and entrepreneurship that's made this country what it is. Having our international students in the classroom alongside American students does exactly that.
Great. And Sarah, from your perspective, as an important and growing high-tech company, how do you, that's very active in bringing on international interns and students, what's the value that you see in having these young people work at Coinbase?
So on the employer perspective, just to kind of echo what Melissa was talking about in her response, on the employer side, we really do depend, when we look at our intern class, our new grad class, anything in early careers, we have a pretty good percentage of students that come from international backgrounds. And time again, I've worked in the university space for about 5 to 6 years, around 6 years now. And so they really do bring about this breadth of like cultural and global experience to the workplace. And that really benefits not only like their own learning and they bring it back to their campus, or if they decide to go back to their home countries, but our US counterparts and employees really benefit from this exposure as well. And so as a fast growing company, we are dependent on international students for our internships and for our early career programs. So we have had to get very creative with it, just because there is that kind of gap if we did restrict this sort of communication, this sort of connection as well.
Thank you. So let's give a sense to our audience, sort of quantify what student and intern mobility looked like pre-COVID in terms of numbers, and what it looks like today. If any of you want to kind of jump in, from your different perspectives, and just kind of sharing that the harsh distinction between pre-March and looking at August now in terms of the movement of students and interns.
So I would say, Jennifer, if you take, for example, the summer work travel program, summer work travel every year brings about 100,000 participants to the United States for a short period of time. It's both summer and winter, by the way, seasons. It's kind of a misnomer, but the bulk of those participants come during the summer. And so you would have whatever that number is, let's say 80,000 or so for a summer. But this year there was, an ability to keep some people here who were here already or may have come to the United States, but due to both COVID and then the proclamation, the vast majority of those people have not been able to come to the United States. And so you've got workplaces all throughout the United States that rely on these participants to really supplement their American workforce, because in, let's say, tourist locations and resorts, they're just not able to find enough Americans. And actually, they're not even able to find enough workers, period. And typically, they're looking throughout the season. A lot of those places continue to be busy on the Jersey Shore, mountain resorts near national parks and elsewhere, and have been suffering as a result of not having J1 participants. And so they, both the businesses have to run shorter hours, and of course you have fewer profits and all of that. So there's been a significant economic impact just over the course of the summer with that program. If you add an intern trainee, camp counselor, au pair, and others, you really see the impact over the past few months.
Thanks.
I would add to that, Jennifer, that well before COVID-19, new international student enrollment in the U.S. is down 10.8% since the fall of 2016, and we shouldn't make the mistake and think that international students are no longer studying abroad, right? They're just going to places like Canada, China, Australia, and the UK, which they perceive as more welcoming and more safe. So I think that, it's still unclear to many universities whether their incoming first-year international students can even get visas to begin their studies here. And then when they get here, do they have to be quarantined separately from US students? For how long? It varies from state to state. So there's still tremendous confusion on the university side about exactly what their responsibilities are and whether they can get these students here. Numerous colleges are looking to their education abroad offices for assistance. So some are deploying their education abroad programs and partnerships overseas to provide fall semester classes for international students to take. And that means that those students are not living in our communities, contributing to the local economy as they normally would be.
Thanks. Sarah, if you can share with us kind of what even Coinbase's plans were sort of pre-COVID or volume of international students that you were bringing in to where it is today.
So before COVID, when we did our hiring cycle, I think like most tech companies, we kind of did a survey of what visas we would need. So at the start of the summer, this past intern cycle, about a quarter, almost 30% of our students were international students, and about half were going through the J1 visa. So we're based either they went to school in Canada or they went to school internationally and were coming over to the US for the internship term. And with COVID and just a lot of things shifting with borders and consulates closing, we had to get very creative on how to still make the internship work. And so when we think about this issue kind of going forward, luckily Coinbase, we do see so much value in international students. And so luckily we do have outposts like we are looking at, seeing how we can build out a more global presence. We do have an office in London that we've thought about leveraging for this coming internship cycle. So it as of now, no plans to really decrease that. But we've just had to get very creative to make sure that we are able to have interns and new grads as well join Coinbase.
Thanks. Okay, so here's where I want you to pull out the crystal ball and help us think about, again, from your perspectives, what do you see? So we've got kind of three things going on with COVID, certainly affecting the mobility, but also the June 24th executive order limiting or suspending certain types of visa types, but then also sort of the mindset of people in terms of safety, security of, and are they going to feel welcome? So the question is really around looking at the medium to long term. How do you think our current situation is going to affect the interest of both international students and interns wanting to come to the United States, and then frankly, businesses, like Coinbase that have had to get creative and find other solutions? Will they go back to kind of pre-COVID, pre-proclamation levels of international student and intern engagement? And maybe I'll start with Melissa.
Well, I think that despite the current political divide in the US, there's broad bipartisan agreement at all socioeconomic levels and demographics that international education is an essential element of a modern college experience and is key to US economic competitiveness. So I think the message to international students is that they are welcome here. And companies want them, and US communities want them, and we recognize that they do enrich our lives and our country. I think colleges and universities are trying very hard to support international students who are impacted by COVID-19 through housing refunds or scholarships to cover tuition. Many are paying their research assistantships, whether or not the students are able to be on campus. And so there has been tremendous support extended to international students, many of whom couldn't go home for the summer, couldn't see their parents, were not eligible to work. So I think that's really important for international students to understand, and for companies to realize that we need to be flexible. And if I were running a company right now, I would start the green card process as soon as the person is legally eligible. I'm sure that Sarah can tell us a lot more about that. But also making sure that our congressional representatives, or your congressional representatives, hear from you about the impact that the proclamation is having on your businesses.
Thanks. Sarah or Ilir, if you want to take that.
Sure,
longer term. Yeah.
So I always say this to my team. I think we have plan A, B, and C when it comes to international students. And so again, to the point of being flexible, creative, I've encouraged my peers at other tech companies as well, just really thinking outside the box. Okay, so if the J1 is suspended for this year, like what are some other ways that we can engage? Let's think about entities in other countries. Let's think of a work study program through schools. Just being very open to that. And I also think, I really do, when I think about the company, like you have to show the data. So I know something that I've showed to stakeholders within my own company is that, look, like here's kind of our intern class or early careers class. We have a sizable portion that we do rely on this international talent. And so thinking of ways of like, okay, if the H-1B doesn't work, we have this other plan, and you get very familiar once you stay in this space for so long. But just having plan A and B and C, just to make sure everything's okay. So.
And Jennifer, I would say that and having those types of plans that Sarah's outlining is really important, because the political situation in the U.S. is really difficult, and it has been building for a number of years. What we've seen, when I worked on Capitol Hill, for example, in the 90s, some of these programs, guest worker programs, for example, were controversial among some people, but the J1 program was not. And one of the issues I worked on was immigration issues. But we've seen that over time change, and over the past number of years, we've seen both advocates on the left and on the right oppose work-based visa programs. So not just the J1 programs, but other programs as well. And over the past number of years with the Trump administration, we've seen that kind of approach become front and center within a presidential administration. And so in the context of the Trump administration, you've seen a dramatic change in immigration policy, not through legislation, but through executive action. And the proclamation that was issued in June is the most recent example of that, but it's been across the board. And that proclamation for a lot of people within the administration was a culmination of 4 years of effort to get to that place. If President Trump wins re-election, there's a broad assumption in our field that the proclamation will be extended, that there will be a rationale, an economic rationale to extend it for a period of time. And we can be sure that there will be people within the administration, the next Trump administration, working really hard to keep it in place, and definitely people outside the administration doing the same thing. If Biden were to win the presidency, I think some people assume that the proclamation would just be lifted automatically. But we have to be aware that there are groups of people on the left that are ascendant within the Democratic Party who also view these programs suspiciously. Now, the data doesn't support the idea that these intern, trainees, summer travel, camp counselor, pair, teacher programs supplant American workers. In fact, all the data shows the opposite, right? That these programs actually support American jobs. And of course, intern and trainee directly don't have that kind of impact. But the arguments continue to be made. They are made against the facts. And even if Biden were to win, I suspect that there would be people on the left pushing for some level of a restriction, because that's what they were doing before. So we need to be aware of that. Melissa is absolutely right. There is bipartisan support in Congress for these programs and among the American people. That said, we do have this proclamation. It will be in place by the end of the year. I suspect even if President Trump loses re-election, they may extend it past the end of the year. So all of us need to be vigilant and not only thoughtful in the work that we do and the approaches that we take, but also, as Melissa said, conveying the importance of these programs to your communities, to your institutions, doing that repeatedly and regularly with members of Congress, also at the local level with your mayors, your city councils, the governor. All those people have an influence over the administration. That's especially true with Republicans right now, but it will be true potentially if Biden wins. It'll be true among Democrats as well. So that investment is a critical one, and it's always been critical, but now we know that it's needed because there's a major obstacle in front of us.
Ilir or any of you, if you had any kind of advice for our listeners to help in terms of what they can do to help make that case, what should they be doing to make sure that this is a temporary suspension, and that eventually, sooner than later, we can get back to bringing in international students and interns. What should our audience be doing right now?
Well, I'll just follow up with what I said a moment ago to expand on it just a little bit. I would say that right now we're asking people to engage the staff and people at the local level, right? We've engaged the policy folks here in DC, and for the most part, as I said, they're very supportive of these programs. But the local folks who work for members of Congress and also others at the local level need to understand the impact locally, because it really needs to build up from the grassroots, right? So colleges, universities, the businesses need to communicate with their members of Congress the local value to local businesses, local institutions, local people. Do it, both with data and then also with stories, compelling anecdotal stories, and do it as much as you can over the coming months.
Yeah, I would add to that, Jennifer, that I represent the Forum on Education Abroad, which is recognized by the U.S. Department of Justice for having the responsibility to set standards for the field of education abroad. And at the same time that we're severely limiting the number of international students that can come to the U.S., the field of ed abroad has been decimated by COVID-19. And so our own US students don't have the opportunity right now to gain the skills that employers need by going abroad, learning flexibility, adaptability, how to work with people in from different cultural backgrounds across geographically dispersed teams. And so it really is a double whammy that I think will have long-term impact on the US economy if we don't straighten this out and both bring students here and send them abroad again. One of the things you asked about what people can do right now, the forum is collaborating with Ilir's organization and a number of other leaders to create a new broad international education coalition. And then in the next few weeks, we'll be launching a new website called the internationalcoalition.org. And we welcome anyone who wants to talk about or support the importance of international education to join that coalition, whether they're employers, local community members, colleges, universities, anyone that thinks that these issues are important.
I'm going to turn the conversation over to a discussion around virtual. So we talked a lot about kind of the limitations of mobility at this time, and to Sarah's point, her organization's gotten really creative, and a lot of companies we've been reading about all summer have kind of converted their in-person internship programs to virtual programs, and we know there's a lot of virtual learning happening in higher education. I'm curious from your perspectives, and maybe we'll start with Sarah, around how has this transition to virtual international internships, how has it been? What are the results of it? What can you share in terms of your own experience or your organization's experience with that?
So we decided around mid-March that we would move completely virtual. I think at that point we were still counting that maybe. I think we were now looking back, it's very wishful thinking. We thought we would be in person. So we're like, oh, okay, maybe we'll start virtual, then move. It just kept getting pushed out. And finally, by end of March, we said, okay, let's just make it a call just to keep it clean. And so a bit apprehensive. I worked in the university space for some time. Very apprehensive on how the virtual program would shake out, both from the learning perspective of our students, as well as like, how would that look like for their managers, their mentors? Coinbase really does invest in early career talent. So that wasn't, we didn't really have to do buy-in. People weren't pulling out the asks for interns or for new grads. So that was a huge plus for Coinbase. But I'm really, really pleasantly surprised. So out of our 62 interns that interned this summer, more than 80% will be eligible for full-time or return internship offers. So super high. We did have to adjust like our programming, any of our learning and development. And I think that I read somewhere pretty early into shelter in place, it takes 4 times as long to communicate something when it's completely virtual. And so just making sure we had extra resources for our students as well as our mentors and our managers, just to ensure with like alignment, since especially students, they're very junior in their career. I think about my own experience. If I was an intern now, how would I be as a remote intern? Just make sure that we're setting them up for success. So.
Thanks. And just to follow up to that, will you continue the virtual option sort of indefinitely? What does that look like for you guys?
So simultaneously with shelter in place and moving our intern programs and everything completely remote, we as a company are embracing remote first. So as of now, obviously with COVID, everybody is working remote until at least January. We don't know what 2021 has in store for us, so let's see how that plays out. But as a company culture, we are embracing remote first. So a lot of conversations at the leadership level, and I'm involved as well, of what does that mean for early career talent. You know, I think that there's a lot of benefits. Overwhelmingly, a large portion of our interns and our new grads would have liked the option to come into the office. And so I anticipate going forward the flexibility to be there. So still have a physical presence in San Francisco and a few hub cities across the country, but leave the option open. We see that as really the future of work, as well as increasing our diversity and just giving more flexibility to people as they grow in their careers.
Thanks. And Melissa, from your perspective of higher ed, I mean, we're reading in the newspapers every day of institutions that are converting to virtual from in-person or some sort of hybrid model. And you talked about skills that individuals learn through these abroad experiences. What's your take on, you know, how effective we can be in helping people build those critical skills for the future through virtual models?
Well, I think virtual exchanges and virtual internships have certainly become more popular over the past few months. And our organization just published guidelines for global online learning because our members were asking for that. And I don't think we see virtual experiences as a substitute for being immersed in a new culture. And you know, you're surrounded by the sights and smells and languages of a different country. But there's some really interesting pedagogies that are emerging, and I think it's going to be impactful, and virtual is going to be with us well beyond COVID-19. You know, I think a lot of institutions turn to virtual as a stopgap to finish that spring semester, worrying about students' academic continuity and ability to graduate on time. But internship programs in particular have been really successful at pivoting to a virtual environment. And, you know, I think we're all doing our work virtual, or many of us are doing our work completely virtually these days, and it's definitely a learned skill. So if you're doing that internship with people who are in a different location or who are from a different culture, you know, you still are gaining a lot of those intercultural skills, the effective ways to communicate, how to be adaptable and flexible, which is what I think employers are looking for in our graduates. So we're all just, I think in the higher ed side, many of us are just beginning to figure it out. And so it's still very much a work in progress. We're definitely looking to places like the Stevens Initiative at the Aspen Institute and the SUNY Collaborative for Online International Learning, which have models and resources to share with the field. But I do think it has become remarkably popular with students, and they do see it as a viable alternative.
Great, and then I'm going to ask a final question, and then we'll move into audience Q&A to each of you, and you know, maybe if you could respond in a sentence or two, just on advice, either for young people that are looking, you know, students or interns that are looking to have an international work experience, or employers that are really rely on that international talent. What advice do you have for them to kind of get through these challenging times? I'll start with Sarah, you on the right, and then go to Ilir and Melissa.
So what advice could I share with students? It's been a journey, to be completely honest with this year, and I think we're still figuring it out as well. We are a really, really fast growing company, and I always tell students this, especially as we looked into the summer and kind of working through what does the, with the J1 getting suspended and just kind of coming up with creative solutions. And so I just tell all the students up front, like, hey, we're figuring this out together. On the company side, I've told some of the leadership within my own company, like, let's just be flexible. We have to be open to it. Getting creative. You have to think long-term as well. So to give just a quick example here, we had 12 students, I believe, that went to school in Canada, and usually they would have come through to intern in San Francisco through the J1, and then we've had to switch over to the virtual format, and with borders closing. And so we don't have a legal entity in Canada. And so taking a step back and thinking like, okay, like what if that's a small portion of 12 students? Think about as our program grows, like what kind of impact does it have on the entire organization? And so that's something that we've kind of talked about, like, do we start an entity in Canada now? I know a lot of other tech companies are considering that as well. And then on the company side, we're talking, a lot of my peers as well on the tech company and fintech space, like we're sharing ideas as well. There's that plan A, B, and C that we all kind of talk about, as well as just talking to leadership and just showing, what portion of the class interns and new grads come from international backgrounds, like what kind of ideas, we have when we look at 2 years ago, where are they now? Like, what's the tenure there? I think was a really good story to say, is that international students, once they joined the company, they tended to stay for a little bit of a longer time. That was a really compelling piece of data to show to leadership as well.
Thanks. Ilir?
So we are part of the Virtual Global Talent Series today, and I think all of us are involved in this work because we care about the globe, and we are deeply committed to the idea of internationalism and connecting people, and the essence of the Fulbright-Hays Act, which was to increase mutual understanding globally. And so I think this is an opportunity for us not only to think innovatively, as Sarah was talking about, and that's critical, but also to see ourselves in a much broader context as individuals who are part of an effort whose principal design is, yes, to run programs well, or to educate people, or to increase skills or language, but more globally to create mutual understanding so that we have a greater investment in peace and prosperity around the globe. This is a very difficult time for not just the United States, but countries all around the world. For a variety of reasons, we have major challenges when it comes to migration, when it comes to technology, other demographic changes. Those challenges are with us. They've been with us for a little bit. They're going to be with us, I think, for years to come. And so all of us are playing a role in some form of fashion in trying to achieve greater mutual understanding. And we can do that remotely for sure. At some point, we will have an opportunity to do it again in person. But I think it requires us, this moment, not just the pandemic and the proclamation, but to challenge more globally around populism and other issues, growing authoritarianism. This, I think, moment requires all of us to think about ourselves differently, to think about ourselves and the work that we do as advocates and the conversations we have among our family and friends and in our institutions as opportunities to educate people, but also to advocate for those programs and to think about ourselves within that context. All of us have power as individuals, and we probably have a lot more power than people appreciate as individuals. And I would say, this is the time to think about yourself as a powerful person within this, global movement, and to think about how you use that power daily in your life, but even, how you proactively think about participating in the efforts that keep these programs not only alive, but also thriving over time. So whether you're joining the International Coalition or you go to People for International Exchange, an initiative of the Alliance or other groups. There are lots of opportunities for people to be involved in large ways, but also in small ways as well. And we should all take those opportunities.
Thanks. Melissa, quickly.
You know, I couldn't agree more. And I would just add that for me, it's all about nurturing relationships and expanding networks. So if you're an employer, look to the colleges and universities in your area. Those are allies for you. They also want international students to be here. And they may have international students on the ground right now who are eligible to work or looking for opportunities. So I'd say, you know, expand your network that way. For international students, I think the message has to be sent over and over and over. You are welcome here. And you know, continue. Don't lose faith. Maintain contact. Communicate with the college and university often, and try and build your own network so that when you are able to come to campus here, you have some community connections already. So that's advice I would give.
Thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to facilitate and moderate our audience Q&A. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you so much to everybody. It's been a really great conversation, and I love the messages about advocacy and inclusiveness, and just really ensuring that, that students and interns are welcome, you know, in the U.S. and in other countries, and you know, what steps that you're doing to advocate for that fact. So thank you so much for your great input and contributions for this panel. So before I ask the first question, I just want to remind the audience that you can see on the screen that it tells you how to submit Q&A questions. So if you could just submit your question via the questions control panel, so you'll see a drop down that says questions, and then you just type your question in the space that says type question here. So, so with that, we're going to get started on our first question, which is for Sarah. And so one of the attendees would like to know how, Sarah, how does Coinbase instill its company culture via virtual internships?
So when we moved our virtual program remote, you know, we had to really kind of, the elements of the program were still the same. So we still had social events for interns, you know, learning and development, speaker series. But just sort of the format, we did want to make sure that interns still felt they had like that cohort feel when they joined the company. So before the interns even arrived, we had met up with all the managers, let them know that make sure you have all of your, set up a one-on-one their first day to lay out expectations, as well as make sure that the intern is included any team events that are going on. We have a public calendar that has all of the fun things that normally would have been in the office, but we are moving virtual as well. And then as a team, we made sure to have more frequent touch bases with the interns as well. We also found that pairing off interns with each other, so something that would come organically had they been into the office, you know, sitting next to somebody during onboarding or something like that. We've really tried to make sure that we could replicate that to ensure that they are able to network with other people, not only among their cohort, but also we also paired them up with somebody outside their immediate team, just so they can like get to know more people across the company.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. It sounds like a very thoughtful program to ensure that the interns feel included and to represent Coinbase's culture. So thank you for that. Next question is, if international students don't end up coming to the US, you know, Melissa, I know you mentioned, for example, that there are other sort of quote unquote more welcoming countries, and you gave some examples. So if they're not coming to the US in the volumes that we've traditionally seen before COVID, is there any advice that any of you have for organizations, particularly nonprofits, who still want to recruit international interns?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is look to internship provider organizations. Many of them have services for US students who want to study abroad or intern abroad, but they also offer internships in the US. And so they're often looking for employers in the US who would offer an internship to a student based outside of the country. So that could be a good source of interns, I'm sorry.
Stephanie, the June 22nd proclamation has an exception or a series of exceptions that were issued a few weeks ago. And one is for programs that are supported by governmental entities. Those are limited in number, but that potentially is a source of interns or internships. If people can either get creative in terms of looking for those types of internships or even engaging with governments abroad that might have an interest in sending interns here. It may be that, obviously that takes a little bit of time, but it may be that, you know, a nonprofit working in cooperation with other nonprofits, employers, and others might be able to work with a country abroad that has a strong interest in having interns in a particular area, for example. Something to think about. We're working and thinking about those exceptions because we pushed for them. They were very narrow, and so they're not that helpful. But another way to think about it is to think about how your programs support the national interest and how they might be covered by those exceptions. One of the things that we saw, one of the changes to the exceptions themselves was language that was put in the introductory paragraphs that says that these exceptions are not exclusive. There may be other exceptions or other circumstances. And part of what we're telling our members is to be both creative but also active, read aggressive in pushing for national interest exceptions. And so thinking creatively about the exceptions themselves, how the people you want to bring may or may support and both the idea of the exceptions, but also your businesses, your communities, whatever connection you might make to national interest.
That's great. Thank you.
Add one other thing. You know, there are organizations like Rotary International, AFS, professional associations that are international. And so you may be able to tap into those networks to offer internships through members who are on the ground in different countries.
Great. Yeah, excellent thoughts. Thank you both. Jennifer, did you want to talk a little bit too about Cultural Vistas at all and how you're assisting organizations? Yep. Thank you.
I'll just add to that we actually are working with a couple of the exceptions that Ilir noted. We have a large and long-standing program with the government of South Korea that brings, you know, hundreds of South Korean interns to the United States. And you know, once things become safer, frankly, we will be allowed to bring those students in country. The other thing I would say is that there are a lot of, not that we work with them, but a lot of F1 students in country already that are attending institutions of higher education that bring that global perspective and are very interested in willing and wanting to work in US companies. But yeah, I mean, from Cultural Vistas standpoint, we work with, you know, and we are doing virtual internships, you know, with over 100 countries around the world. And so we'd be happy to help and brainstorm with companies around, you know, how to make this happen and how to continue to engage the international talent that you've really come to appreciate and enjoy having in your workplaces.
Terrific. Thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes left and we have 2 more questions. So the next question is, will continued high employment hurt the international student from getting internships? So for example, decrease internship availability. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think international students often have different qualifications, whether that's language or cultural understanding, that brings a different value depending on what that internship is. And so I I don't see international students as competing with US students for internships in many cases. It's a both and situation. So, you know, in other periods of high unemployment, like the financial crisis of 2008, we still saw international students getting internships and being valued. So.
If I could add to that, a lot of the companies that we work with, you know, most of them are global companies, and they are bringing international interns in as a way to continue to forge relationships with countries that they're doing business with, to get either market insights or perspectives from those markets. And as the U.S. economy shrinks, you know, the global economy is going to be that much more important to have, you know, be trading or investing or working with markets overseas, and to have that international perspective. To Melissa's point, that, you know, bringing in a South Korean, if you're really wanting to engage with the South Korean market, is something that a U.S. you know, person and Americans just not going to bring that same perspective. So it's both and again, as the need for companies to expand even greater their market, their global footprint, you know, these students are going to be critically important, and will I think only help companies expand their operations.
And there are some formal programs that employers could look at, like the Ohio Export Internship Program out of Ohio State University, where they're matching student interns, both international and domestic, to companies that have export aspirations.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, certainly your, you know, yes and answer to this, right? And options are show that, you know, international internships are still very critical to the U.S. economy. And so leading on to that, just with our final question is, you know, and Ilir, you touched on this a little bit, but how does American policy in this space in reaction, specifically in reaction to COVID and the unemployment fallout, compared to other developed economies with top-tier universities? So just a really, I mean, it's a pretty extensive question, but just sort of high-level thoughts on
that. You know, I think certainly the difference in our approach to dealing with COVID compared to other Western democracies has been significant. I would say that looking at other countries, so if you think about the list that Melissa gave earlier, the places where higher education is increasingly receiving some competition, right? So Canada, Australia, the UK, and other places, especially those countries that where the you know, majority speak English. Something similar is happening in some of those countries as well with respect to the work-based programs. Increasingly, they are looking for opportunities to grab some of the market share that the United States has with respect to those programs. So, you know, I think for those of us who are here in the United States, we have work to do. We have to ensure that we convey a welcoming message, and that we talk about our programs in important ways so that other people do the same thing, and that our perspectives about these programs, and also more globally about exchange and travel, are heard at the national level, so that we can both inform and influence the public policy debate, so that as we go through we get on the other side of the pandemic, let's say, that we can return to some level of normalcy when it comes to these programs. And so, you know, I think that that's something that we all need to work on, so that America becomes, again, the exceptional place that invites a lot more people, rather than the exceptional place that has challenges with not only COVID-19, but also with international exchange programs.
That's great. I think we all very much echo those sentiments that you've just shared, to see really the return to normalcy in terms of America becoming an accommodating place to everyone. So thank you very much. So again, just thank you very much to Melissa, to Jennifer, to Ilir, and to Sarah. We really appreciate, you know, your input, your insights, and use of your crystal ball, as Jennifer noted. So if you'd like to learn, to the audience, if you'd like to learn more about any of these organizations, we've listed the website. And with that, we thank you for attending our third conversation. And our next one will be on September 9th for Q&A with Horst Gallo, who's Vice President of HR Global Mobility at IBM. And he's going to talk a little bit about lessons from a career in mobility and his pathway to get where he has within the global mobility space and within IBM. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you all. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Envoy. Thanks, Ilir, Melissa, Sarah. Have a great day.